Hello, it's Chris from chrisbeatcancer.com, and you're listening to the companion audio for 20 Questions for Your Oncologist. Now, the reason I created this is because I have talked to hundreds of cancer patients. Of course, I was a cancer patient myself in 2003 and 4, and I've talked to hundreds of cancer patients over the years, and one of the biggest problems they have is they just don't know the right questions to ask their oncologist. And there are so many critical questions and so much important information that you need to make an informed decision when you're going into cancer treatment or when you're trying to decide which avenues to take with cancer treatment. And frankly, doctors are busy and they're just not telling patients everything they really need to know. They're glossing over a lot of important stuff. And so I created this to serve a need in the cancer community because patients have no idea what they're getting into and they don't know the right questions to ask. And if you ask the right questions, you will get some very interesting answers that will profoundly affect the decision and decisions that you make going forward. But if you ask the wrong questions or don't ask enough questions, then you could make the wrong decision. So let's get started. Now, I titled this 20 Questions for Your Oncologist. Had a nice ring to it, but in reality, it's more like 50 questions. So you may not use all 50 questions, but you're going to use a lot of them for sure. Pick and choose the ones that are most appropriate, but most of these, I would say, don't skip over these. Use them because they will help you if you put them to use. Okay, so the first question is, what's my diagnosis? You need to find that out. It's pretty important. What kind of cancer do you have? And by the way, it's a good idea to get a second and a third opinion to make sure that your diagnosis is correct, right? Don't just trust one doctor's opinion on your diagnosis. The only thing worse than being treated for cancer is being treated for cancer when you don't even have cancer. Next question is this a fast-growing cancer or a slow-growing cancer? How long has this been growing in my body? Now, this is important because if it's a slow-growing cancer, you may have a lot more time than you realize. This will deflate and appease the sense of urgency that maybe your doctor or whoever may be trying to impose on you to do something immediately. So if you have a slow-growing cancer that's been growing in your body for 5 or 10 years or maybe longer, guess what? You probably have more time. You need to know how much time you really have in the sense of, is this fast growing or slow growing? The next question is, what do you think caused my cancer? This is a really good question to ask your doctor because it's always interesting to hear what doctors say when they ask this question. And the follow-up to it is, do you think an unhealthy diet or pollution or stress have anything to do with this? And you'd be surprised how many doctors say, no, it's not your diet. No, stress doesn't have anything. No, it's just, you're just unlucky, which we know luck is not a factor in cancer development. Luck is not a factor in health. It's not a scientific principle at all and has no place in this discussion. So let me give you a little background here because the U.S. has very different cancer rates than many other parts of the world. For example, Mexico, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Honduras, Haiti have half the overall cancer rate of the U.S. They're doing something differently down there. There are 34 African nations with a third of the overall cancer rates of the United States. Niger has a fifth of the overall cancer rate of the United States. If you look at the Middle East, Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Bangladesh, Thailand, Indonesia, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, India, Nepal, Bhutan, Uzbekistan, Sri Lanka, and Maldives also have a third of the overall cancer rates of the United States. Colon cancer rates in sub-Saharan Africa are 50 times lower than they are in the United States. These countries eat a very different diet and live different lifestyles than the people in Western nations, in industrialized nations like the United States, Canada, Europe, and Australia. So we have a lot of scientific evidence that our diet and lifestyle are major factors. Environmental pollution as well, and stress, and I'll get to those things. It's now estimated that 70% of premature deaths in the United States are attributed to 3 factors: poor nutrition, lack of physical activity, and tobacco use. The number 1 cause of cancer is smoking. That's tobacco. The number 2 cause of cancer from the National Institutes of Health, the NCI, the National Cancer Institute. The number 2 cause of cancer is obesity. Obesity is caused by your diet and lifestyle. So if you eat a lot of high-calorie junk food and man-made food and processed food and sugary drinks, tons of meat and dairy, you are contributing to weight gain and being overweight and eventually obese. If you have a lack of physical activity, you are also contributing to weight gain. You're not burning enough calories every day. You're eating more calories than your body is using for energy, and it will store those calories as fat. So that's nutrition and lack of physical activity right there, contributing to obesity, which is the number 2 cause of cancer. So we know this. It should be noted that before death comes years of suffering from disease and disability from the leading causes of death. So leading causes of death is cardiovascular disease is number 1. That's heart attacks and strokes. Cancer is number 2. The medical industry knows it. The scientific community knows it. But for some reason, oncologists don't think it matters. They don't think it's a factor. So that question is super important because if your oncologist acknowledges these things, and by the way, don't go in there and try to give them a lecture. Everything I told you, just keep it to yourself. You feel free to Google and research and verify what I'm telling you. But the point is not to go in and try to lecture your doctor and prove them wrong and show them a statistic or whatever. The point of this is to see what they know and what they tell you. So if they start talking about diet and lifestyle and are passionate about the fact that it is a cause of cancer and stress is a factor, then you know you've got someone that is really in tune and really cares about prevention and getting to the root causes. If you have a doctor that just blows all that off and just says, oh, we don't know what caused it, it's stress, it's genetics, probably genetics, or, just unlucky, then that's a doctor you might think twice about working with. Some other causes of cancer: environmental pollution, chemicals, pesticides are sprayed on our food. There's 80,000 chemicals used in our environment, in our world today, that are registered with the EPA in cosmetics, prescription drugs, household cleaners, lawn care, agriculture. These chemicals are in nearly every product you buy. They're in your makeup, they're in plastics, they're in paint, stains, varnishes, fabric dyes. They're flame retardants used in your mattress, non-stick coatings on your cookware, and food additives. And only about 7% of these chemicals have full safety test data available. About 43% of them have no safety testing data at all. We're living in a culture where 2,000 to 3,000 new chemicals are patented and registered every year. Lung cancer is the number 1 cause of cancer death. Of course, cigarette smoking contributes to lung cancer, but radon gas causes 16% of lung cancers. That's more than 1 out of every 10 lung cancers is attributed to radon gas. You should test your house for radon gas. Night shift work is another contributor, working the night shift. So we have all these known causes, and I don't want to go on and on and on about all the known causes because I'll cover that in the Square One series. But you need to come into the appointment with your doctors armed with a little bit of background and perspective, and that's the point of what I'm doing right now for you. Next question. What treatment do you recommend? What do you think I need to do, doc? How are we going to treat this? Very simple. And they're going to outline, we think you need surgery and chemotherapy, and then you need radiation. And you want to take really good notes, right? Take a notepad, write down everything that we're talking about here. And it's very important that you record this conversation because you'll want to go back and reference it. You don't need the doctor's permission to record a conversation that you're a part of. But if you want to ask for their permission, go ahead and just say, hey, this is just a whirlwind, crazy time for me. Do you mind if I record this? Just so I don't forget anything. And the doctors are going to say, oh yeah, sure, it's fine, or whatever. They're going to recommend some treatments. And then you want to really drill in to the specifics of the treatment. So the next question is going to be, what are the drugs you're going to treat me with? and they're going to list out a number of drugs. Next question. Are there any other drugs that I might have to take during the course of treatment? Now, this is important because they may not list the full list of drugs you may have to take, because if you have side effects and problems from taking, let's just say, 5-FU, there are other drugs they're going to prescribe you for some side effects of 5-FU. So it's a good idea to go ahead and ask what other drugs might be involved. You want a complete list of the drugs that you're going to start with and the drugs that you may have to take. Next question. For each drug, and write down the drug names as they tell them to you. Ask them, what are the short-term side effects of 5-FU? And they will tell you. Okay, what are the long-term side effects? And let them tell you. And go down the list for each drug and let them tell you the side effects, short-term and long-term. See how much they tell you. Next question. Do any of these drugs have life-threatening side effects? This is important for obvious reasons. And what you need to know is chemotherapy drugs cause brain damage, heart damage, liver damage, lung damage, immune system damage, hearing loss, kidney and bladder damage, intestinal damage, internal bleeding, peripheral neuropathy. That's where you lose the feeling in your fingertips and toes, sometimes temporarily, sometimes permanently. And chemo drugs can cause new cancers to form in the body. Okay, so that's your background. If they're not talking about all those potential problems, they're leaving out some serious information. If all they're telling you is, well, you're going to be nauseous, you're going to lose your appetite, you're going to lose your hair, you're just going to be sick and you're going to feel bad and food's not going to taste very good. If that's all they're telling you, then they're leaving out the important stuff. They're telling you all the little kind of small side effects that everybody knows about, and they're not telling you the major head-to-toe damage the chemo drugs are going to cause in your body. In 2015, a report came out that said nearly 1 in 5 new cancer cases are secondary cancers. 1 in 5, okay? That's 20% of new cancer cases are secondary cancers. That means cancer patients are developing new types of cancer in different parts of their body caused by treatment, either caused by chemo drugs or radiation treatments. Since 1970, the amount of secondary cancers has increased by 300%. And secondary cancers, they can come quickly within the first, few months, few years of treatment, or they can come decades later. So it's important that you know that, and your doctor should acknowledge that when you talk about this. Next question. How old are the drugs you're recommending? Now, you would think that the older the drug, the better, because it's been well tested. But if you think about it a different way, and by the way, that's the way the oncologists try to brag on these drugs. Oh, we've been using these drugs for decades, blah, blah, blah. But the truth is, the top 10 most prescribed standard chemo drugs are between 20 and 60 years old. Methotrexate was developed in the 50s. So was fluorouracil, that's 5-FU. So was cyclophosphamide. Doxorubicin was developed in the 1960s. Cisplatin, 1978. Gemcitabine, 1980s. Etoposide, if I'm pronouncing it right, 1983. Chlorambucil, 1984, or maybe earlier. Docetaxel, 92, and paclitaxel, also in 92. Does that give you a whole lot of confidence in what they're doing? That the fact is they're using drugs that are 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years old? The cancer industry is constantly bragging about, new life-saving treatments, and yet they're still using drugs that are decades old. Next question. Is this treatment palliative or curative? Curative is sort of an obvious definition. It's intended to cure you. Palliative care has one of two objectives. Basically, they're either trying to extend your life or improve your quality of life. Those are the two explanations for palliative care. Now, extend your life might only mean a few extra weeks, a few extra months, okay? And those are extra weeks and months being sick and poisoned with chemo, typically. Improving your quality of life, well, we know that's not the case. Your quality of life is not going to be better being sick and poisoned with chemotherapy. But the amazing thing about this question and the reasoning behind this question is that there was a recent study, and they found that 2/3 of cancer patients in this survey did not know whether or not they were getting curative or palliative treatments. 2/3 of them didn't know. They thought they were getting curative treatments, and their doctors knew there's no way this treatment's going to cure you. You need to know the difference and make sure you ask that question. If they say it's curative, okay, you want to ask them, well, what's the recurrence rate after this treatment? And they're going to give you a statistic, and then you ask them, where does that statistic come from? If they say, well, this is palliative, then your best question is, what's the point? Like, what's the point in doing this if it's not going to cure me? Okay, now they're going to answer, well, we think it could extend your quality of life or something, or extend your life or improve your quality of life. From there, you can make a decision as to whether or not you think that's true. I can tell you from personal experience and many people I've talked to and the friends and loved ones of cancer patients that I've talked with, many people, that those treatments, they would say, did not improve their quality of life, and whether they extended their life or not, it's very hard to measure that, almost impossible. I've heard many stories from cancer patients, families who they were told, with this treatment, you should live another year, and they die in 6 months or whatever. So didn't extend their life. And they were sick and miserable the whole time. And it may have hastened their death. Some additional questions along these lines would be, how much time do you think I have to live if I do this treatment? You may not want to know. You really need to know yourself before you ask this question, because you don't want them to put a hex on you and say, well, you've got 6 months to live. And then you just can't get that figure out of your mind, and you start to believe it. And that can be very depressing. So you may not want to know how much time they think you have to live, okay? But if you're comfortable knowing their opinion, and that's all it is, remember, no person can put an expiration date on your life. But if you're comfortable knowing, then ask them, how much time do you think I have to live if I do this treatment? And they're going to give you some kind of answer, and then you ask them, how much time do you think I have to live if I do nothing? They're going to give you another answer, right? So they might say, well, if you do the treatment, should maybe hopefully live another year. Let's just use that as an example. And if you don't do treatment, you may only live 6 months or 9 months. So they're going to give you some kind of answer. Usually it's always going to be less. You're going to live less time if you don't do treatment. We know that's not the case. What is the 5-year disease-free survival rate for my specific diagnosis with your treatment protocol? Okay, this is really important that you word it that way. Not 5-year survival. 5-year survival just means cancer patients are alive. They could be on a life support. They could be knocking on heaven's door, about to die, but because their heart is beating at the 5-year mark, they're a successful 5-year survivor. That's not what you're interested in. You want to know 5-year disease-free survival for your specific diagnosis with their treatment protocol. When I went and saw the doctor, he actually just lied to me, just flat out lied. He said my 5-year survival was about 60% chance I would live 5 years. But I was stage 3C colon cancer as a young adult, and it was actually about 28% at best. And he quoted a very inflated statistic to me. I'm assuming because he wanted to give me hope or whatever, but even 60% wasn't good enough for me. Next question. What is the 5-year disease-free survival rate for my specific cancer if I do nothing? What's the 5-year survival if I do the treatment? What's the 5-year survival if I do nothing? And the truth is, they don't like collecting data on patients who do nothing. In fact, there are very few studies on cancer patients who don't do some sort of treatment, because patients who don't do treatment typically don't come back, and they don't follow those people. Okay, so he probably will not have an answer to that question. You'll find out. But the cancer industry, they like to track patients that are doing some kind of treatment. They don't follow up with patients like me who did nothing. No one has followed up with me about that. Next question. How much does chemotherapy contribute to 5-year survival for my type of cancer? Now, I'm going to give you a link to a study that came out in 2004 in the Journal of Clinical Oncology that looked at 22 different cancers. And the analysis of the study was seeing what chemotherapy contributed, how much it contributed to 5-year survival. And the overall average was 2.1%. You may have seen that statistic bandied around the internet. Again, that's lumping all cancers together, and which isn't fair, okay? The truth is, for some of those cancers, chemotherapy contributed 0% to 5-year survival. It means it didn't matter, it didn't help. Now, others, it did better. So, like, for example, some lymphomas, childhood leukemia, testicular cancer, the 10-year survival is up around 90% with chemotherapy treatments. Those are the cancers that chemotherapy has made the most progress and is the most effective for. But you need to look at your specific cancer, hopefully it's included in this study, and see how much chemotherapy contributed. Now, you might be thinking, or your doctor might even say, if you bring up this study, I don't recommend you do it. Again, you're just going to argue with someone that's not interested in they don't think you know anything and that you're capable of learning anything, and they think they're the expert. So you don't have the open door to teach them anything typically. But you might think, well, but that study's 10 years old, 11 years old. May I remind you, the 10 most popular cancer drugs they're using are between 20 and 60 years old. So I would say that study is still relevant because they're still using almost all those same drugs. Looks like they are. What about 10-year survival, right? How much does chemotherapy contribute to 10-year survival for my cancer? Do you have a statistic for that? And they probably do. You want to know what it is because it may be very different. Oncologists typically just like to tell you the good news. They want to give you as much hope as possible. And they don't want to tell you the scary truth. And the scary truth is really what you need to know because you'll make a better decision when you're faced with scary truth versus optimistic lies. They may say something like, well, 5-year survival is around 80% for your type of cancer. Okay, well, what about 10-year survival, disease-free survival? Oh, well, that's like 20%, or something. So you need to know, you project out a little further in time with this. Next question. Are there any studies comparing this treatment protocol to patients who did nothing? Now, I touched on this earlier, but just go ahead and ask the question. Are there any studies comparing this to patients who did nothing? And there aren't. Your doctor is not going to have a study. If he does, I'd be shocked. Very unlikely he will know of a study. And if he does, ask to see it. Okay? So if your doctor mentions a study or any study in the course of this conversation, oh yeah, well, there's a study, blah, blah, blah. Great. Do you have it? Can I see it? Can I read it? It's not inappropriate to ask for a copy of the study and the information that they are referencing. Because again, this is life or death decision stuff. Okay, now this next question, and I hope you ask it. I certainly would love to ask this if I'd thought of it with my oncologist. And the question is, what if the treatment doesn't work? Can I get a refund? And your oncologist will probably laugh. And of course, the answer is no. But it'll be interesting to see what else they say. And by the way, when you ask these questions, ask the question and then be quiet and let them talk for as long as they're going to talk until they run out of things to say. So don't make it easy on them. This is a really tough situation, and you need to be tough on your doctor because this person is holding your life in their hands, and they better be serious about your treatment. They better know their stuff, and they better be honest with you. Next question. May I have copies of the material safety data sheets on all the drugs I'll be taking? I'd like to take them home with me today if possible. The material safety data sheet is the insert. It's the drug insert, right, that the pharmaceutical company has to provide with the drug to doctors that lists all of the known side effects and damages to your body and counter indications with other drugs and things like that. You have every right to get copies of these, and you should ask for them and make sure you don't leave until you get copies of the material safety data sheets on these drugs. And by the way, you can Google these too. This is the tough series of questions, okay? Have you ever taken any of these drugs to understand what they're like? Have you ever taken any of these? Just kind of act like a dummy. Don't come in there trying to act like a smarty. I mean, you're coming armed with tons of questions, which is awesome. But don't try to act like a super smart person. Just be like, have you ever taken any of these drugs? Just to see what they're like? Just be quiet and let them answer. Of course they're going to say no. Next question. Would you do this treatment if you had the same diagnosis as me? Followed by silence. Or you can follow it up with, would you just try to make the most of the time you have left? You know, like, would you do this treatment, or would you just try to enjoy the rest of your life? What would you do if you were me? Phrase those or arrange them any way you feel appropriate, but you get the gist of what we're doing here. Now, it's good to find out if your physician is married and or has children. If you're small talking, or at this point you could even say, are you married? Do you have any children? Yes. If your wife had the cancer I have, would you give them this treatment? Watch their eyes and their body language. If they change positions, if they cross their arms, if they start to fidget, if they look away, if they blink nervously, if they do that thing where when they're talking to you, they're like talking to you with their eyes closed, they may be lying. They're obviously very uncomfortable with that question. And then you ask them the question again. What if it was your child? Would you give him this treatment? And just wait, let them answer. Don't say anything else. Don't break the tension. It's very important. The tension will reveal things in the conversation. If you make it easy on them, it won't. And you see what we're doing here. We ask them, what would you do if you were me? What if it was your wife? What if it was your child? All three. Is it true that chemotherapy drugs can make cancer more aggressive? The truth is yes, it absolutely can and often does. Okay, that's the truth. They should acknowledge that. They should be acknowledging that, yes, that can happen, and let them talk. Be prepared. They're either going to be honest about this or they're going to try to blow it off, deflect, change the subject. Next question, does chemotherapy kill cancer stem cells? A lot of times it doesn't. That's one of the big problems with chemotherapy is chemotherapy will shrink a tumor and it'll kill a lot of cells in the tumor and the tumor shrinks, but it doesn't kill the stem cells. And the stem cells are the ones that survive and cause the tumor to start growing again after chemo is finished, or they cause new tumors to start growing in different parts of your body. So he should say chemotherapy does not always kill cancer stem cells. Or he may say no, it doesn't. Or he may say yes. And if he says yes and that's all he says, then he's only telling you half the truth. Follow that up with, I read that chemotherapy drugs are carcinogenic. Can this treatment cause more cancers in my body? The truth of this is yes. Many chemotherapy drugs are carcinogenic. They're known carcinogens and listed by the U.S. National Toxicology Board or program as known carcinogens. So your doctor should say, yes, it could cause more cancers in the body. Again, they may try to downplay it, say, but only in a few, very small percentage. Well, what if you're that percentage? Statistics coming out of the pharmaceutical industry are highly suspect because we know that there's a huge profit incentive. So they really want to downplay anything that is negative and would dissuade people from taking those drugs. So the drug reps are giving information to the oncologists that paints the drug in the best light possible. And they're giving them statistics that they feed back to you, which also support the drug company's ultimate goal, which is to get you to say yes to chemo. So you have to keep that in mind the whole time. It's not that your doctor's a bad person, although we've seen a few doctors that were falsely diagnosing cancer patients with cancer in order to treat them with chemo and made huge amounts of money. I've seen that in recent years. If you don't know who I'm talking about, one of them is Dr. Farid Fatah, F-A-T-A, and he was in Detroit. So you Google his name, F-A-H-R-I-D, F-A-T-A. Terrible person. But most oncologists are not terrible people. But they're getting a lot of their information, most of their information about the drugs they're prescribing are coming directly from the drug manufacturers. So they're repeating to you what the drug manufacturers are telling them. And that's not good. Next question. Do cancer cells eventually become resistant to chemotherapy? The answer is yeah. A lot of cancer cells, cancer stem cells, become resistant. And this is why cancer patients, why oncologists have to switch up drugs. They have to change chemo drugs because drug number one worked for a period of time and it shrunk the tumor a certain percentage, and that's all. Shrunk it by 50% or 60%, but that's all. It wouldn't shrink it anymore. Then they have to change drugs. Or shrunk the tumor 100%. And then the tumor comes back, they try the drug again, didn't work at all the second time. So then they have to switch drugs. So they should be honest with you and explain this to you. Next question. What other options are available besides standard treatment? Okay, what other options do I have, doc? What if I don't want to do chemo? And see what they say. Now, when I asked my doctor this, I asked him, are there any alternative therapies available? This was in January 2004. And he became very arrogant, condescending, and really just used fear to intimidate me and said, if you don't do chemotherapy, you're insane. So be prepared. And by the time you get this far in the conversation, your doctor may be very irritated with you because you have just asked them more questions than any cancer patient has ever asked them in the history of their career. So they can thank me for that. But seriously, yeah, if they've been nice the whole time, they might change their tune when you start asking them about alternative therapies. Okay, now the next series of questions is about diet-related questions. Here we go. First one. What do you recommend I eat while I'm doing chemotherapy? What should I eat? See what they say, right? A lot of doctors tell their patients to go home and eat whatever they want. Just make sure you get enough calories. Drink Ensure, eat ice cream, drink milkshakes, whatever. If you want to get more specific and have a little more fun with this, then ask them specific junk foods and see what they say. Like, can I have ice cream? Yeah, you can have ice cream. Can I have pizza? Yep. Is it okay if I still drink Coke? Oh yeah, sure. Are there any fast food places that I shouldn't eat? You can really go on and on and on with this. And frankly, the more you do, the better recording you're going to have to share with other people, because most people don't believe that doctors would tell cancer patients that it's okay to eat ice cream and donuts and fast food and junk food, but they are, and they're telling patients this constantly. Okay, if you have one that says don't eat that stuff, that's actually a wonderful person, great doctor who actually, maybe researching and reading and trying to learn about nutrition and very open to those things. Next question is, what's the best anti-cancer diet? What is the best diet for a cancer patient? What's the best anti-cancer diet? Right here, you're going to find out, does this person have any regard for nutrition or not? Next question, are there any foods I should avoid? I know these questions seem a little bit repetitive and a little bit redundant, but when you ask the same question in 3 different ways, you'll draw out a much more complete answer. So I recommend you do this. Don't just ask one, ask all 3. And then the last one is, so I was thinking about maybe converting to a plant-based diet. like eating a lot of raw fruits and vegetables and juicing. Is that okay? Would that be okay? See what they say. They may tell you can't do it. That's what my doctor told me. He said, no, you can't do a raw diet. It'll fight the chemo. That's what he said. Now, it's important that I explain why he said that. He said it because there's a very old idea about the neutropenic diet for cancer patients. And that basically, the neutropenic diet is a diet of all cooked food. All cooked. They're afraid that cancer patients might eat a raw apple or vegetable that has some bacteria on it, and that bacteria will cause a problem in their body because their immune system has been suppressed, destroyed, etc. by chemo. Seems like a valid concern, but there has actually been some recent research that has disproved that, and the neutropenic diet is not necessarily required. It's not necessarily mandatory for cancer patients, okay? So that's sort of an old idea that's not relevant now. Okay, the next series of questions are related to testing. There are some very, very powerful and informative tests you can have done as a cancer patient that can help you make good decisions. So one test you could ask them about is called the Oncostat Plus test. So have you ever heard of the Oncostat Plus test or the Oncostat test? It's also known as the Greek test. It's also known as the chemosensitivity test. Is that something you'll be ordering for me before we start treatment? Typically, they're going to say no. But this test, it's done in Greece. The company is RGCC, and it's a very comprehensive blood test. And what they do is they take your blood and they test it against a bunch of different chemotherapy drugs. They test it against a bunch of natural substances like vitamin C and Laetrile and things like that. And there's also genetic testing involved. So I think it should be mandatory for every cancer patient before they start treatment, because you need to know if these drugs are even going to work on your cancer, and you can find out before they poison your body with them. Another question to ask is, is there any genetic testing that you do to make sure that, I don't have a problem with these drugs, that my body can detoxify these drugs? Now, what I'm getting at here is the chemotherapy drug 5-FU is severely toxic for people that have a specific enzyme deficiency. It's called the DPD enzyme deficiency. And if those people take 5-FU, it can kill them in a matter of weeks. I mean, it's severely toxic. They have a problem detoxifying their body, and so it just like builds up in their body and overloads them with toxicity and can kill them. I mean, it can be deadly. Google "know the risk of 5-FU chemotherapy" and their website will pop up. And this was a man whose wife had that DPD enzyme deficiency. They didn't know it, and 5-FU killed her. Now, there's a book that, if you really want to dig into all the different types of testing, whether it's early detection testing, chemosensitivity testing, all kinds of cancer detection and progress tests, there's a really fantastic reference guide, and it's called Cancer Free, Are You Sure? And that's by Jenny, I believe her last name is pronounced Herbacek. She's an RN, and she gave me a copy of her book at a conference, just kind of slipped it into my hand, and when I got home, I took a look at it, and I was really impressed. She just did a ton of research, and it's just a great reference guide on all the different tests that are available to you as a cancer patient. You don't need them all, right? It's as you read through her book, each chapter outlines the different tests, what they do, how they might be helpful to you based on your situation. So find a copy of that book. It should be on Amazon. Cancer Free, Are You Sure? ? Next series of questions relates to references. Hey, doc, so how many patients do you treat per year? And how many do you see per day? Just find out. You may say, I treat 1,000 patients a year or something. And by the way, you're setting up for these next questions, so you want to ask this one first. So how many patients have you cured of my disease? Uh-oh, because he may have just been bragging about how many patients he treats. And now you're saying, how many of them have you cured? And you can follow this up with, I'm just really nervous about this, and I'd like to get some references. Can I speak to 5 patients with the same cancer as me that you've cured, that are cancer-free after 5 years? Is that possible? This is not an unreasonable request, okay? And if they balk at it, right? If they balk at it, just say, well, you say, well, I can't give out my patient's information. So, well, would you be willing to call them and ask them if they would be willing to talk to me? Because I know if I was a patient, if I was 5 years out and I was cancer-free and you had helped me get well, I would be happy to talk to anybody, and sing your praises. So I'm sure your patients would probably be willing to talk to me. Would you mind asking them? And frankly, do you have any that have been in remission for over 10 years? That's even better. I'd really love to speak to them if you have any. 5 years is okay, but if you have any that are 10 years out, that would be ideal. So ask for references, right? If you get your house painted or get some plumbing done or your roof put on, if you're smart, you're going to get some references before these people start tearing up your house. And you should get some references on this doctor. And by the way, it needs to be successful patient references, not some other doctor or some other patient saying, oh, he's wonderful. Oh, she's wonderful. I love my doctor so much. And they still have cancer. Like, what does that even mean? You can have the nicest doctor in the world, but if they don't cure you, why would you want to work with them? When you're dealing with a life and death disease, you need someone that's getting results. And that means curing patients. Next series of questions. Talk about money. Talk about money. Be bold. These are tough. Some of you will not ask these questions because you're too timid, and that's okay. It's okay. But I know some of you will, and I'm really excited for those of you out there that have the chutzpah to ask these questions. So first question is the setup. What is the total cost of the treatment you're recommending? How much is this going to cost? And they may say, oh, well, it depends on your insurance, and it's sort of a deflection. Say, well, no, I know. Right, I know my insurance will cover some of it, and I'll have to pay for some of it, but what's the total cost going to be? Regardless of how much I have to pay or the insurance pays. They should have a pretty good idea, and if they act like they have no idea, I think they're being deceptive. They're not being forthcoming with you. They know. They know how much they're billing for what they do. Okay, next question is the real tough one. If you get an answer, well, this treatment will probably cost, $100,000 or $300,000 or $1 million, whatever they say. How much of that is your profit? I'm just curious to know. I'm just curious to know how much money you're making off me as a patient. Just say it and be quiet. This is, again, the tension. Let the tension take over. Next question. So I read somewhere that private practice oncologists buy chemo drugs at wholesale and bill the patients or the insurance company at a marked up price, and they make a profit on that. Is that true? It is true. It's true. If you're dealing with a private practice oncologist, it's estimated that up to 60% of their income comes from the profit on chemo drugs, which is a lot. And if 60% of their income is coming from chemo, guess what? They're going to want you to do chemo. That's what's paying the house note, the private school tuitions, the car notes, the lake house mortgage, all that good stuff. They need you to do chemo. That's how they make most of their money. Now, if they work for a big group or a hospital, or if you're in Canada or Europe and you have nationalized healthcare, it may not be the case. They may just be salary or be compensated per patient or something different. But hey, it's good to ask. Okay. And then you kind of follow up with, so is it true that you make a profit on the chemotherapy drugs you prescribe? So this is sort of an either-or situation. Do you make a profit on the chemo drugs? And do some of the drugs have a higher profit margin than others? And does that fluctuate, like month to month? Do the drug companies run specials? All of that's true. They do make a profit on the chemotherapy drugs, like I explained, if they're private practice oncologists, typically. And chemotherapy drugs do have different profit margins, and the profit margins vary, and drug companies run promotions to get some drugs prescribed more than others. These are tough questions. You should ask your oncologist. Final questions. Okay, I've got a lot to think about, right? This is a lot to process. And thank you for your time, for taking the time, to answer all my questions. If I decide to undergo treatment, can I call you after hours with questions? I mean, will you give me your cell phone number? Just ask them if they will. If they won't, then it's like, well, gosh, okay. Next question. I would like to take some time to change my life. Would that be possible? I mean, how much time do I have to do this before I start treatment? I just need to change a lot of things in my life before I start. So how much time do I have? How much time do I have to think about all this and make my decision? And what you may be surprised to find out is they may be saying, look, you need to start this week or next week. And when you ask that question that way, they may say, well, we could push it back a month or 2 months or 3 months or 6 months. Okay. And it'll help you a lot. It'll help your state of mind to have their permission, right? If you have their permission to take some time, then you won't feel like you're going against your doctor's orders. Next question. Is it possible for the body to heal cancer? Can the body heal this? My body created it. Can my body heal it? I mean, I know it isn't healing it at the moment, but is it possible? It is possible. In the medical industry, they call it spontaneous remission. It's a well-documented phenomenon. There is a collection of something like 1,000 cases of spontaneous remission compiled in the Spontaneous Remission Project. And you can Google this. The reason they call it spontaneous remission is because they don't like to admit that the body healed it. Okay, they don't like the word healing. When someone has cancer and then they come back and the cancer's gone and the doctors didn't treat them, they don't know what to call it. Then they don't want to call it healing, so they came up with this term, spontaneous remission. So it's well documented. It's a common phenomenon. My friend Dr. Kelly Turner wrote a book about this called Radical Remission, which is a wonderful book, and I think you should read that. It'll be very interesting to see what your doctor says when you ask them that question. Don't lecture them on spontaneous remission and all this stuff. Don't turn this into you trying to prove your doctor wrong or argue or lecture. The main goal of all these questions is not to argue. You don't want to argue. All you want to do is play the reporter. Ask tough questions, tough, uncomfortable questions, and see what they say, to see if they're being honest with you or not. That is the goal of this. Last questions. If I decide not to do this, if I decide not to do treatment, and I just want to enjoy my time left on earth and with my family and just, I feel good right now. So, I just want to feel good as long as possible. And if I start chemo next week, I'm going to feel terrible. I feel like I really don't think I'm ready to do that just yet. So, if I decide against chemo, will you still support me? Can I still come in and get blood tests and some scans along the way and just kind of monitor things? That's really important. If they turn into a jerk about this, then you need a new oncologist. Find someone else. And by the way, the new oncologist, you don't have to go through all these questions with them. You just go meet them and say, hey, I have cancer. Here's what I'm doing. I need somebody just to monitor my blood work and do my scans. Right? Will you do that for me? Last question. Can I get a copy of my medical records? I'd like to get copies of my medical records before I leave today. And also those material safety data sheets. Can I get all that before I leave? That's it. That's what you need to do. You need to walk out the door with that stuff. Go home and listen to the recording and play it for your family and friends and talk about it and think about it and pray about it. And at the end of this series of questions, like I said at the beginning, you will have more information than you can imagine. And I believe this series of questions will solidify in your mind if you're working with the right person or not. And solidify in your mind the best course of action to take. Maybe not all the specifics of the best course of action, but it should solidify in your mind whether or not conventional cancer treatment is right for you. And that's what I want to help you decide. And I look forward to your feedback. And I want to close with 3 John chapter 1, verse 2. Beloved, dear friend, I pray that you may prosper in good health, even as your soul prospers.